Ethan moved carefully through the shadows of Zorthia's capital, his heart pounding with every step. The city was quieter than usual, as if it too sensed the tension brewing in the palace. He knew he couldn't afford to be caught not yet. Not until he had a chance to expose Lord Malric's treachery. Mara had dropped him off near an old maintenance tunnel that led directly into the palace grounds. It was risky, but Ethan didn't have many options. With each cautious movement, he replayed his plan in his mind. He needed to get close enough to access the main assembly hall where Malric would be presenting his case against Ethan to the court. If everything went right, Ethan could reveal the truth before Malric tightened his grip on Power Dot as he approached the palace. Ethan spotted 2 guards patrolling the entrance. Ducking behind a stack of crates, he waited for them to pass before slipping inside. The familiar corridors of the palace felt strange now, no longer a place of wonder, but a maze filled with danger. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow seemed like it might hide an enemy. Finally, Ethan reached the grand hall where the assembly was being held. Voices echoed from within, sharp and angry. Peering through a crack in the massive doors, he saw Lord Malric standing at the center of the room, addressing the gathered nobles and officials. His tone was confident, almost smug, as he laid out his accusations against Ethan. "The human is a threat to our empire," Malric declared, gesturing dramatically. "He has no understanding of our ways, no loyalty to our people. And now we have proof of his treachery." He held up a holographic image of the sabotage power core, pointing out Ethan's supposed fingerprints. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ethan clenched his fists. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the doors just enough to slip inside unnoticed. Staying low, he crept along the edges of the room, heading toward the control panel near the front. If he could upload the evidence Mara had given him, the entire court would see the truth, but getting there wouldn't be easy. The room was packed with nobles, their attention focused entirely on Malric. One wrong move, and they'd spot him instantly. Ethan's pulse quickened as he reached the base of the platform where Malric stood. Just a few more steps. Suddenly, someone gasped. "It's him! The human!" Ethan froze, realizing he'd been seen. All eyes turned to him, including Malric's, whose expression twisted into a mix of shock and rage. "Seize him!" Malric shouted, pointing an accusing finger. Before the guards could act, Ethan darted forward, leaping onto the platform. Ignoring the shouts around him, he plugged the data chip into the control panel. The screen flickered to life, displaying records of Malric's communications and financial transactions. Names, dates, and locations flashed across the display. Undeniable proof of his involvement in the sabotage. "What is this nonsense?" Malric snarled, stepping toward Ethan, but the damage was done. The nobles stared at the screen in stunned silence, their faces reflecting disbelief and anger. "It's not nonsense," Ethan said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "This proves that Lord Malric orchestrated the attack on the power core. He framed me to discredit King Varnak's chosen successor and take the throne for himself." The room erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted questions at Malric, demanding answers. Malric tried to deny the accusations, but the evidence was overwhelming. Even Arna, who had initially doubted Ethan, looked shaken. "You lied to us," Arna said coldly, her voice carrying over the noise. "You betrayed my father's trust and ours." Malric's composure cracked. "This is absurd. I've served Zorthia faithfully for decades." "Faithfully?" Lysira interjected, stepping forward. "Your greed nearly destroyed our energy grid. How dare you claim loyalty?" Kayla folded her arms, glaring at Malric. "If father were here, he'd strip you of your title and exile you without hesitation." Nixar remained silent, her gaze locked on Ethan. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also something else, admiration. She hadn't spoken up during the confrontation, but her presence alone signaled her support. With Malric exposed, the court quickly turned against him. Guards dragged him away, his protest fading into the Distance. When the room finally quieted, all eyes shifted to Ethan. For a moment, he felt self-conscious under their scrutiny, unsure of what to say. Then Arna stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You risked your life to uncover the truth," she said slowly. "That takes courage and intelligence. Perhaps we misjudged you." Lysira smirked, though her tone was lighter than usual. "I'll admit, you're smarter than I gave you credit for." Kayla nodded approvingly. "And braver. Most humans would have run instead of fighting back." Even Nixara smiled faintly, relief evident in her posture. "You proved yourself today, Ethan. To all of us." Ethan let out a shaky breath, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He hadn't expected praise or acceptance so quickly, but hearing their words meant more than he could put into words. "Thank you," he said simply. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because your father believed in me, and because I believe in Zorathia." The princesses exchanged glances, their earlier doubts replaced by a newfound respect. They still had questions about how to move forward, but for the first time, they truly saw Ethan as part of their world. Later that evening, after the court adjourned, the princesses invited Ethan to join them in the royal gardens. The air was cool, and the stars above twinkled brightly. For once, there was no tension between them, only camaraderie. "You've changed things, Ethan," Arna said, after a long pause. "Not just for us, but for the Empire. People will remember this day." "I hope so," Ethan replied. "But there's still work to do. Rebuilding trust won't happen overnight." "No, it won't," Kayla agreed. "But maybe that's a good thing. Sometimes slow progress lasts longer." They spent the rest of the night talking about the future, how to strengthen alliances, improve relations with Earth, and ensure that Zorathia thrived under its new leadership. Ethan listened intently, offering suggestions when asked. He wasn't royalty by birth, but he was starting to feel like he belonged. As the conversation wound down, Nixara lingered behind with Ethan. "You've come a long way since you arrived," she said softly. "Do you regret any of it?" Ethan shook his head. "Not a single moment. Even the hard parts taught me something valuable." Nixara smiled, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. "Good, because I think you're exactly what we need." For the first time since arriving on Zorathia, Ethan felt truly at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't facing it alone anymore. Things had been going smoothly for Ethan, at least as smoothly as they could go when you were a human trying to prove yourself in an alien empire. The princesses were beginning to open up, and Ethan felt like he was finally making progress. But just when he thought he might actually have a chance at earning their trust, disaster struck. It started with whispers. Servants avoided meeting Ethan's eyes in the hallways, and courtiers exchanged nervous glances whenever he entered a room. At first, Ethan didn't think much of it. He figured it was just the usual gossip that came with being new and different. But then Arna called him to the throne room, her expression darker than usual. "There's a problem," she said bluntly, gesturing for him to sit. The other princesses stood nearby, their faces tense. "Someone has accused you of sabotage." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Sabotage? What are you talking about?" Lysira stepped forward, holding a datapad. On its screen was an image of a damaged power core from one of Zorathia's key energy facilities. "This happened last night," she explained. The core malfunctioned, causing widespread blackouts across the city. Evidence suggests tampering, and your fingerprints were found on the control panel. "That's impossible," Ethan exclaimed, standing up. "I've never even been near that facility." Kayla crossed her arms, her tone skeptical. "Then how do you explain this?" She tapped the screen again, zooming in on what looked unmistakably like Ethan's handprint. Ethan stared at the image, his mind racing. Someone had set him up, but who? And why? Before he could respond, Nixara spoke up quietly. "There's more. Lord Malric is using this incident to challenge your legitimacy. He's calling for your arrest." "Who's Lord Malric?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. Arna sighed heavily. He's one of the highest-ranking nobles in the Empire and one of Father's biggest rivals. He's always wanted control of the throne. If he can discredit you, he'll have the perfect excuse to seize power. Ethan sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. He'd known there would be challenges, but he hadn't expected betrayal on this scale. What happens now? He asked, looking at each of the princesses in turn. For now, we have no choice but to comply with the investigation, Arna replied grimly. Until we find proof of your innocence, you're under suspicion. Later that evening, Ethan was confined to his quarters under guard. It wasn't exactly a prison cell, but it felt close enough. Tarek brought him meals and updates, though the news wasn't encouraging. Lord Malric was rallying support among the nobles, painting Ethan as a dangerous outsider unfit to rule. Public opinion was turning against him, and the princesses were struggling to defend him without evidence. One night, as Ethan paced his room, the door creaked open slightly. To his surprise, Nixora slipped inside, closing it quickly behind her. "We don't have much time," she whispered urgently. "Malric is planning to arrest you tomorrow." Ethan frowned. "Why are you telling me this? Aren't you risking a lot by helping me?" Nixara hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I believe you're innocent, and I think my sisters do too, even if they won't admit it. We can't let Malric win." "So what's the plan?" Ethan asked, determination replacing his earlier despair. Nixara handed him a small device. "This will help you escape. Take it to the lower levels of the palace. There's a servant named Mara who owes me a favor. She'll get you out of the city." "What about you?" Ethan pressed. "If they find out you helped me, I'll handle it," Nixara interrupted firmly. "Just promise me you'll clear your name, for all of us." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." With Nixara's help, Ethan managed to slip past the guards and make his way to the lower levels. The palace was eerily quiet, the usual bustle replaced by an oppressive stillness. When he reached the designated meeting point, a young woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes greeted him. "You must be Ethan," she said briskly. "Come with me." "We don't have much time." Mara led him through hidden passages and secret tunnels, eventually emerging in a secluded alleyway outside the palace grounds. From there, they boarded a small, unmarked transport ship. As they lifted off, Ethan caught one last glimpse of the glittering city below. His heart ached at the thought of leaving, but he knew he couldn't fight Malric's accusations without evidence. Once they were safely away, Mara handed Ethan a data chip. "Nixara gave this to me. It contains records of financial transactions and communications between Malric and his allies. Use it wisely." For hours, Ethan sifted through the information, piecing together a pattern of corruption and deceit. Malric had orchestrated the sabotage himself, framing Ethan to eliminate any competition for the throne. Armed with this knowledge, Ethan devised a plan to expose the truth, but it would require returning to Zorathia and confronting Malric directly. When Mara landed the ship near the outskirts of the capital, Ethan prepared to sneak back into the palace. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew he couldn't give up, not now. The princesses had begun to trust him, and he owed it to them and to King Varnum to see this through. As he moved cautiously through the shadows, Ethan replayed Nixara's words in his mind. "Clear your name, for all of us." He clenched his fists, resolve burning within him. No matter what happened next, he was ready to fight for justice, for the Empire, and for the future he believed in. Over the next few days, Ethan noticed a subtle shift in how the princesses treated him. While they still teased and questioned his abilities, their tone had softened just a little. He wasn't sure if it was because of the trials or simply because they were starting to see him as more than just an outsider, but it made a difference. For the first time since arriving on Zorathia, Ethan felt like he might actually belong here, even if only a little. One evening, after another long day of learning about the Empire's customs and history, Ethan found himself sitting alone in the palace gardens. The air smelled sweet, like flowers mixed with something earthy and unfamiliar. Tiny glowing insects flitted around, casting soft light over the lush greenery. It was peaceful, a rare moment away from the chaos of court life. He leaned back against the tree, closing his eyes and letting out a deep sigh. "You look tired," a voice said softly. Ethan opened his eyes to see Nixara standing nearby. She held a small tray with 2 cups of steaming liquid. "I thought you might need this." Ethan smiled faintly. "Thanks. What is it?" "It's called Vaorin. It's calming and delicious." She handed him one of the cups before sitting beside him. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the warm drink. It tasted like honey and spice, soothing his nerves almost instantly. After a few minutes, Nixara spoke. "You've been doing well in the trials. Better than anyone expected." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Yeah, well, I'm trying. Doesn't mean I'm not scared half the time." Nixara tilted her head, studying him curiously. "Why are you so determined? Most humans would have given up by now." "Because your dad believed in me," Ethan replied without hesitation. "I don't know why, but he did. And I owe it to him and to all of you to at least try. Besides, running away isn't really my style." Nixara nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You're different from what I imagined. Back when Father announced you'd inherit everything, I thought it was a mistake. But now, I'm not so sure." Her words surprised Ethan. Out of all the princesses, Nixara had seemed the most reserved, the hardest to read. Hearing her admit she was reconsidering her opinion meant more than he could put into words. "Thanks," he said quietly. "That means a lot." The next morning, Arna summoned Ethan to the throne room. When he arrived, he found all 4 princesses waiting for him. Their expressions were serious, and Ethan braced himself for bad news. Instead, Arna gestured for him to sit. "We've decided to give you a chance to understand us better," she began. "Each of us will spend time with you individually, sharing parts of our lives that shaped who we are. Perhaps then you'll grasp the weight of what Father left behind." Lysira smirked. "Or maybe you'll realize how impossible this whole thing is." Kayla rolled her eyes. "Let's just get it over with." Nixara remained quiet, though her gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment longer than usual. Their plans started immediately. That afternoon, Arna took Ethan to the Royal Archives, a vast library filled with holographic records and ancient scrolls. As they walked through the rows of shimmering shelves, Arna explained her role as the eldest daughter. "I've spent my entire life preparing to lead," she said, her voice tinged with both pride and exhaustion. "Every decision I make affects millions of lives. There's no room for error." Ethan listened intently, realizing for the first time how much pressure Arna carried. Her stern demeanor suddenly made sense. It wasn't just arrogance. It was responsibility. "Must be hard," he said. "Always having to be perfect." Arna glanced at him, surprised by his insight. "It is, but it's also necessary." Later that week, Lysira invited Ethan to join her in the Royal Strategy Chamber. Maps of planets and star systems floated above a large table, dotted with markers indicating trade routes and military positions. Lysira moved confidently among them, pointing out key locations. "Zorathia's power depends on alliances and resources," she explained. "If we lose either, the Empire crumbles." As they discussed tactics, Ethan realized Lysira's sharp tongue hid a brilliant mind. She saw patterns and connections others missed, always thinking 10 steps ahead. "You're good at this," he admitted. "Better than I'd ever be." Lysira raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Don't sound so shocked." Kella's turn came next. She brought Ethan to a training arena where soldiers practiced combat skills. Unlike her sisters, Kayla preferred action over talk. She challenged Ethan to spar with her using padded staves. Though he was no match for her speed and strength, Ethan refused to back down, earning a grudging nod of approval. "You're stubborn," Kayla remarked afterward, wiping sweat from her brow. "I'll give you that. But don't mistake stubbornness for skill." Finally, it was Nixara's turn. She led Ethan to a secluded observatory overlooking the planet. Stars twinkled in the distance, framed by Zoratia's glowing atmosphere. Nyxara spoke softly about her dreams of exploration and discovery, things she rarely shared with anyone. Being the youngest isn't easy, she confessed. Everyone expects me to follow in their footsteps, but I want to carve my own path. Ethan understood that feeling all too well. Growing up in a small town, he often felt overshadowed by people who seemed destined for greatness. Sometimes, he said gently, the best paths are the ones nobody sees coming. Nyxara smiled, gratitude shining in her eyes. You always say the right thing, don't you? By the end of the week, Ethan felt closer to the princesses than ever before. He saw their struggles, their fears, and their hopes. They weren't just royalty, they were individuals, each carrying burdens heavier than he'd imagined. And while they still doubted him, they began to trust him in small ways. One night, as Ethan lay in bed reflecting on everything he'd learned, he realized something important. The princesses weren't just testing him. They were teaching him, through their stories and challenges, they were showing him what it truly meant to lead, not just a kingdom, but a family. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of soft chimes echoing through his room. At first, he thought it was some kind of alarm clock, but when he sat up, he realized the noise came from a glowing orb floating near his bed. It pulsed gently, casting warm light across the walls. Tarek stood nearby, holding a neatly folded set of clothes. Good morning, Tarek said with a slight bow. Today is the beginning of your trials. Princess Arana has requested you join her in the royal court chambers. Ethan groaned inwardly. He'd been hoping for at least one more day to adjust before jumping into whatever these trials entailed. Still, there was no point delaying the inevitable. After getting dressed in the unfamiliar yet surprisingly comfortable outfit Tarek provided, Ethan followed him to the designated meeting spot. When they arrived, Arna was already waiting. Flanked by Lysira and Kayla, Nyxara lingered slightly behind, watching silently. Arina's expression was stern, her arms crossed as she addressed Ethan. Your first trial will test your ability to lead. A group of workers in the city has been arguing over resources. You must resolve the dispute fairly or prove that you cannot handle such matters. Ethan blinked. Leadership? That wasn't exactly his strong suit. Back on Earth, he'd spent most of his life fixing cars and avoiding drama, not mediating conflicts. But complaining wouldn't help. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. All right, let's go. The scene awaiting them in the city square was chaotic. Two groups of Zorathians, each dressed in distinct colors, were shouting at each other, their voices rising above the hum of the bustling crowd. One side claimed they needed the materials to repair vital infrastructure, while the other argued that their project would benefit the entire community. Neither seemed willing to back down. Arana gestured toward the chaos. This is your task. Solve it. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, raising his hands to signal for quiet. To his surprise, the arguing slowed, though skeptical glares remained fixed on him. Clearing his throat, he spoke firmly but calmly. I understand both sides have important needs. Can someone explain what's happening here? A tall, blue-skinned worker stepped forward. We need those materials to fix the water filtration system. Without it, half the city will lose access to clean water. Another worker, this one with shimmering green skin, countered, our energy grid is failing. If we don't address it now, power shortages will affect everyone, including your precious filtration system. Ethan listened carefully, nodding along. He didn't know much about Zorathian technology, but he understood fairness and compromise. What if we split the materials? He suggested. Enough for the immediate repairs to the filtration system, and the rest goes to stabilizing the energy grid. Once those urgent issues are handled, we can work together to gather more resources. The workers exchanged uncertain looks. Finally, the blue-skinned leader nodded. It's not ideal, but it could work. And we'll hold regular meetings to monitor progress, Ethan added. That way, neither side feels ignored. The tension eased visibly, and the workers began discussing logistics. Arina watched silently, her expression unreadable. When Ethan returned to her side, she simply said, "Acceptable, for now." Later that afternoon, Ethan faced his second trial under Lysira's supervision. She led him to a massive chamber filled with glowing panels and shifting puzzles. The air buzzed faintly, making Ethan's skin tingle. "This trial tests intelligence," Lysira explained with a smirk. "You'll solve a series of riddles and challenges. Fail, and you'll trigger a failsafe that locks you inside until someone rescues you." Ethan swallowed hard. Trapped in an alien puzzle room? Not exactly his idea of fun. Still, he squared his shoulders and stepped forward. The first challenge appeared on a panel, a sequence of symbols that shifted every few seconds. Lysira leaned against the wall, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Ethan studied the pattern, recalling similar logic games he played as a kid. Slowly, he began tapping the symbols in order, testing combinations until the panel lit up with approval. The next challenge involved aligning beams of light to activate a mechanism. While Lysira rolled her eyes at his initial mistakes, Ethan stayed focused, using trial and error to find the solution. By the time the final puzzle appeared, a complex equation projected onto the ceiling, Ethan felt a spark of confidence. This wasn't so different from troubleshooting car engines. With careful thought, he solved it, earning a reluctant nod from Lysira. Not bad for a human. The third trial took place outdoors, overseen by Kayla. She brought Ethan to a dense forest where shadows danced eerily among towering trees. "This tests bravery," she announced, pointing to a dark path ahead. "You'll encounter obstacles. Face them head-on or run away like a coward. Your choice." Ethan hesitated. Whatever lurked in those woods couldn't be good. Steeling himself, he walked forward, senses on high alert. Soon enough, a low growl echoed through the trees. Out of the darkness emerged a creature resembling a wolf, its eyes glowing red, and its teeth bared menacingly. Panic surged within Ethan, but he forced himself to stay calm. Remembering advice from survival shows he'd watched, he grabbed a nearby branch and held it like a weapon. The creature lunged, but Ethan sidestepped just in time, swinging the branch to distract it. Another swift movement sent the creature retreating into the shadows. Kayla emerged from hiding, clapping slowly. Impressive reflexes. "I didn't think you'd last 5 minutes." Finally, Ethan faced Nixera's trial of creativity. She guided him to a workshop filled with tools and scraps of metal. "Your task is simple," she said softly. "Repair this damaged drone using only what's available here." Ethan examined the drone, noting its broken circuits and missing parts. He repaired plenty of machines in his garage, but this was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Still, he got to work, piecing together components and improvising solutions. Hours passed as he tinkered, sweat dripping down his forehead. When the drone finally whirred back to life, Nixera smiled genuinely for the first time. "You're resourceful," she admitted. "I didn't expect that." As the day ended, Ethan returned to his quarters, physically and mentally drained. Despite their earlier skepticism, the princesses had begun to see glimpses of potential in him. And though they still doubted his ability to lead, Ethan knew he'd proven one thing. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. Ethan stood in the grand hall of the royal palace, feeling like a fish out of water. The princesses had dismissed him after their initial meeting, leaving him with a servant who introduced himself as Tarek. Tarek was polite but distant, leading Ethan through winding corridors adorned with glowing crystals and intricate carvings. The sheer size of the palace overwhelmed Ethan. Back home, his entire garage could fit into one of these rooms. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but replay the princess's words in his mind. Their mockery stung, but he reminded himself that he hadn't come here to win a popularity contest. Whatever King Varnok's reasons were for choosing him, Ethan owed it to the late king and to himself to give the situation his best shot. Tarek finally stopped in front of a set of double doors. "This will be your quarters," he said. pushing the doors open. Inside was a lavish suite filled with furniture that looked more like art than something you'd use every day. A large bed dominated the center of the room, its sheets shimmering faintly as if they were woven from starlight. On one side, a balcony overlooked the city below, where towers glowed softly against the twilight sky. "Dinner will be served in an hour," Tarek added before bowing slightly and stepping back into the hallway. The doors closed behind him. Leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts, he wandered over to the balcony, leaning on the railing as he took in the view. Zoethia was breathtaking, its skyline alive with colors and lights that danced across the horizon. For all its beauty, though, Ethan felt completely out of place. He wasn't royalty or even particularly special. He was just a mechanic from Ohio. What could someone like him possibly offer to a planet like this? His musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. When Ethan opened it, he found Nixara standing there. She looked different without her sisters around, less guarded, almost hesitant. "I thought you might want to see more of the palace," she said quietly, avoiding his gaze. "If you're interested," Ethan hesitated. Was this some kind of trick? Or was she genuinely trying to be friendly? Either way, he figured it wouldn't hurt to accept. "Sure," he replied, stepping into the hallway. "Lead the way." Nixara led him through quieter parts of the palace, away from the bustling activity of the main halls. She pointed out various rooms, a library filled with floating books, a garden where flowers seemed to glow under artificial sunlight, and a training arena where soldiers practiced with weapons unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. "You don't talk much, do you?" Ethan asked after several minutes of silence. Nixara glanced at him, startled by the question. "I mean, compared to your sisters, they weren't exactly shy about sharing their opinions earlier." A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "They have strong personalities," she admitted. "Sometimes too strong, but they're not wrong to doubt you. No offense." "None taken," Ethan replied with a shrug. "I doubt me too. Still, I'm here now. Guess we'll find out together whether I can live up to your dad's expectations." Nixara studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether he was serious. Finally, she nodded. "You seem different from what I expected." "That? So, yes, most humans I've met or heard about are either arrogant or scared." "You're neither." Before Ethan could respond, they arrived at a massive pair of golden doors. Nixara pushed them open to reveal a dining hall larger than any Ethan had ever seen. Long tables stretched across the room, laden with dishes that smelled incredible but looked utterly foreign. At the far end of the hall sat Arina, Lysira, and Kayla, already seated and waiting. The three older princesses watched as Ethan and Nixara approached. "Took you long enough," Lysira remarked, raising an eyebrow. "What were you doing, giving him a tour?" "Something like that," Nixara replied calmly, taking her seat beside Kayla. Ethan followed suit, sitting across from Arina. The eldest princess gave him a look that could freeze fire, but Ethan ignored it, focusing instead on the food in front of him. The meal began awkwardly. Ethan tried a few bites of something that tasted like a mix between fruit and meat, while the princesses whispered among themselves. Occasionally, one of them would glance at him, smirking or shaking her head. It was clear they still didn't take him seriously. Finally, Arina spoke directly to him. "Tell us, human, what makes you think you're qualified to inherit my father's throne? You know nothing of our laws, our culture, or our people." Ethan swallowed his mouthful before answering. "You're right, I don't. Not yet anyway. But I'm willing to learn. Your father must have seen something in me worth trusting." "All I can do is try to live up to that," Kayla snorted. "Trust? Father trusted you because he was desperate. Our empire is falling apart, and he needed someone expendable to clean up the mess." "That's not fair," Nixara interjected, surprising everyone, including herself. "Father wouldn't have chosen Ethan lightly. If he believed in him, maybe we should too." Lysira rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Don't tell me you're falling for his humble mechanic act. I'm not falling for anything, Nixar shot back. But mocking him isn't helping anyone. Maybe we should focus on solving problems instead of creating new ones. The tension in the room grew thicker, but Ethan decided to change the subject before things escalated further. What happens next? He asked, looking at Arna. Do I get some kind of training? Or am I just supposed to figure everything out on my own? Arna sighed, clearly annoyed by the question. There are protocols. Trials, to be precise. Every successor must prove their worthiness. If you fail... She let the sentence hang ominously. Great, Ethan muttered under his breath. Trials, because my day wasn't stressful enough already. Despite his attempt at humor, no one laughed. Instead, the princesses exchanged knowing glances, as if silently agreeing that Ethan's chances of passing these trials were slim to none. After dinner, Ethan returned to his quarters, exhausted both mentally and emotionally. He flopped onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. This whole situation felt surreal, like he'd stepped into a movie or a dream. Yet, deep down, he knew it was real. Tomorrow he'd face whatever challenges lay ahead, whether he was ready or not. For now, though, all he wanted was a good night's sleep. Closing his eyes, Ethan drifted off, unaware that the trials awaiting him would test not only his skills, but also his ability to earn the respect of the very people who doubted him most. Ethan Cole wiped his hands on a greasy rag and leaned back against the hood of an old car. The sun was setting over his small Ohio town, casting long shadows across the garage lot. It had been another quiet day, just him, his tools, and the occasional sound of birds chirping in the distance. Life wasn't exciting, but it was predictable, and Ethan liked that. Predictability meant no surprises, no chaos. But little did he know, his world was about to turn upside down. The next morning started like any other. Ethan woke up early, grabbed a cup of coffee from the diner down the street, and headed to work. As he pulled into the garage, something unusual caught his eye: a sleek black vehicle parked near the entrance. It didn't look like anything people drove around here. Its surface shimmered faintly, almost as if it were made of liquid metal. Curious, Ethan stepped closer, only to be greeted by two figures who seemed completely out of place. One was tall and wore strange robes that shimmered with colors Ethan couldn't quite describe. The other looked human enough, but carried an air of authority that made Ethan feel uneasy. Before he could say anything, the robed figure spoke in a voice that sounded both deep and musical. "Ethan Cole?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yeah, that's me," Ethan replied, scratching the back of his head. "What can I do for you?" "We come bearing news of great importance," the man said solemnly. "You have been summoned to the planet Zorthia." Ethan blinked. Once. Twice. He must have heard wrong. "The what?" "Look, buddy, I don't know what kind of prank this is, but I've got cars to fix." The stranger didn't laugh or roll his eyes like Ethan expected. Instead, he handed over a small device that looked like a glowing crystal. "This will explain everything," he said simply before stepping aside. Reluctantly, Ethan pressed the button on the side of the device. A holographic image sprang to life above it, showing stars swirling together until they formed the shape of a regal-looking alien sitting on an ornate throne. The alien introduced himself as King Varnip of Zorthia, ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. His tone was commanding yet warm, and his words left Ethan speechless. "To my successor," the king began, his voice echoing through the silence of the garage. "I leave behind not just riches and power, but responsibility. You, Ethan Cole, have been chosen to inherit my legacy. My daughters will guide you, and together, you shall lead our people into a brighter future." Ethan stared at the hologram, then at the strangers, then back at the hologram again. "Wait, me? Why me? I'm just a mechanic." The robed figure nodded patiently. "King Varnut believed humans possess qualities unique among the stars' qualities. needed to unite our fractured empire. Your selection was not random. It was deliberate. But why now? Ethan stammered. And how does someone even get picked for something like this? The king foresaw challenges ahead, the second man explained. Challenges only someone like you could face. Now, there is much to prepare. We must depart immediately. Before Ethan could protest further, the robed figure gestured toward the black vehicle. Reluctantly, Ethan climbed inside, still trying to process what was happening. The interior was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Smooth, glowing panels instead of buttons, seats that adjusted themselves perfectly to his body. Within moments, the vehicle hummed softly and lifted off the ground as they soared higher. Ethan watched his hometown shrink below him until it disappeared entirely. For the first time in his life, he left Earth's atmosphere, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. Stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across velvet, and distant planets floated lazily in their orbits. It was breathtaking and terrifying. Hours later, they arrived at Zorthia. From orbit, the planet looked like a jewel, its surface shimmering with vibrant hues of blue, green, and gold. As they descended, Ethan saw sprawling cities filled with towering spires and floating structures connected by streams of light. Everything seemed impossibly advanced compared to Earth. When they landed, Ethan was escorted to the royal palace. The halls were lined with intricate carvings and glowing crystals embedded in the walls. Servants bowed as he passed, murmuring in languages he didn't understand. Finally, he reached the throne room, where 4 women stood waiting. They were stunningly beautiful, dressed in elaborate outfits that sparkled under the light. These were the king's daughters, the princesses of Zorthia. The eldest, Arina, regarded him with cold skepticism. Her sharp features and piercing gaze made Ethan feel like she was dissecting him piece by piece. Lysira, the second sister, smirked as though amused by his presence. Kayla, the third, crossed her arms and tilted her head, clearly unimpressed. And Nyxara, the youngest, simply observed him quietly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Arina broke the silence. "So this is the human father chose?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "He looks ordinary." Lysira chuckled. Perhaps father's wisdom has finally failed him. Kayla rolled her eyes. "Let's hope he doesn't embarrass us too badly." Nyxara said nothing, though her gaze lingered on Ethan longer than the others. Despite their mockery, Ethan straightened his posture and met their stares head-on. He might not belong here, but he wasn't going to let them intimidate him. "I don't pretend to understand why your father picked me," Ethan said evenly. "But if I'm here, I'll do my best to honor his wishes." The princesses exchanged glances, surprised by his composure. Arina narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced, but said nothing more. For now, Ethan had earned their attention, if not their respect. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test every ounce of courage and determination he possessed. In the weeks that followed Malric's arrest, Zorthia began to heal. The sabotage incident had shaken the empire, but Ethan's bravery and determination had restored hope. The nobles who had once doubted him now looked to him with cautious respect, and the people of Zorthia spoke of him as a symbol of unity, a human who had proven himself worthy of their king's trust. Ethan worked tirelessly alongside the princesses to rebuild what had been damaged. Together, they visited affected cities, meeting with citizens and listening to their concerns. At first, many were skeptical of Ethan, but his genuine care for their struggles won them over. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, he asked questions, learned from their experiences, and worked with local leaders to find solutions. Slowly, the fear and anger caused by the blackout faded, replaced by optimism. The princesses noticed a change in their people and in themselves. Arina, once consumed by duty and perfection, began to loosen her rigid control, trusting Ethan and her sisters to share the burden of leadership. Lysira, whose sharp wit often masked her insecurities, found herself laughing more freely, her cleverness turning into a tool for inspiration rather than sarcasm. Kayla, eager for adventure, embraced her role as a bridge between tradition and innovation, encouraging new ideas while respecting Zorthian customs. And Nixara, quiet and thoughtful, stepped out of her sister's shadows, her creativity sparking. Fresh approaches to diplomacy and governance. As the Empire stabilized, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't stay on Zorothia forever, not completely. Earth was still his home, and he felt a responsibility to strengthen ties between the two worlds. With the princess's support, he introduced reforms aimed at fostering cooperation between Zorothia and humanity. Trade agreements were signed, cultural exchanges arranged, and joint research projects launched to explore shared technologies. At first, some humans were wary of Zorthian advances, fearing domination or exploitation. But Ethan reassured them, explaining how much Zorothia stood to gain from partnership rather than conquest. You became an ambassador of sorts, traveling back and forth between planets to ensure smooth communication. His dual life wasn't easy. Balancing responsibilities on two worlds required constant effort, but it was fulfilling in ways he never imagined. Over time, something else blossomed: relationships. Ethan had grown close to each of the princesses, not just as allies but as friends, and perhaps something deeper. Arina admired his resilience and fairness, qualities she strived to embody herself. Lasira respected his intelligence and resourcefulness, traits that matched her own cunning mind. Kayla found joy in his adventurous spirit, which mirrored her love for exploration. And Nixara cherished his kindness and humility, seeing in him a reflection of the values she held dear. One evening, during a rare moment of calm, Ethan sat with the princesses in the palace gardens. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the soft hum of glowing insects. For a long time, no one spoke. They simply enjoyed the peace after months of chaos. Finally, Arina broke the silence. "You've done more for this Empire than anyone expected," she said, her tone softer than usual. "Including us," Ethan chuckled. "I just did what needed to be done. None of it would have been possible without you four." Lasira smirked. "Don't get too humble. You earned your place here." Kayla nodded. "And maybe we underestimated humans. Maybe there's something special about you." Nixara smiled faintly, her gaze lingering on Ethan. "Something very special." Their words warmed Ethan's heart, but they also reminded him of the unique bond they shared. In a world where traditions often dictated rigid roles, their connection defied convention. It wasn't just friendship, it was trust, admiration, and affection woven together into something extraordinary. Eventually, the topic turned to the future. "What happens next?" Nixara asked quietly. "For us." "And for Zorothia?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "We keep going. Keep building bridges, solving problems, and learning from each other. That's how we make sure Zorothia and Earth thrive." The princesses exchanged glances, silently agreeing with him. They knew challenges lay ahead. There would always be obstacles in ruling an empire, but with Ethan by their side, they felt ready to face them. Months later, Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching as lights twinkled across the horizon. The princesses joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed against his. Below, celebrations marked the anniversary of King Varnak's passing, a day that had once seemed like the end of an era, but had become the beginning of something new. "Do you think Father will be proud?" Nixara asked softly. Ethan smiled. "I think he'd be proud of all of us." Arina nodded, her expression thoughtful. "He saw potential in you when no one else did. I understand why now." "And we're better for it," Lysira added, her tone lighter than ever before. Kayla grinned. "Who knew a mechanic from Ohio could save an empire?" They laughed together, the sound echoing through the night. As Ethan looked at the princesses, he realized how far they'd come from skepticism and mockery to trust and teamwork. What started as disbelief had transformed into unity, proving that even the most unlikely alliances could lead to greatness. And so, under Ethan's guidance and the princess's leadership, Zorthia entered a new era, one defined not by division, but by collaboration. Earth and Zorthia grew closer, their partnership paving the way for a brighter future. For Ethan, it was a dream come true, a chance to prove that even someone ordinary could achieve extraordinary things. As the stars shone brightly above, Ethan felt a deep sense of contentment. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a leader, a friend, and a part of something greater than himself. And though the road ahead would be unpredictable, he knew he wouldn't walk it alone.